This locomotive that was used to bring tanks, guns and ammunition would now be used to help rebuild homes, hospitals and schools. These locomotives that were built for war would now have a lasting legacy in rebuilding Europe. This is the BR52 Creech locomotive. My name is Jamie and let's get into this locomotive deep dive. If you are interested in further history of locomotives, please do subscribe and like this video, as I'll be doing further episodes of like this weekly. Next week's episode will be going into the history of the New York Central's iconic 20th Century Limited, and the week after we'll be going more into East Coast electrics, specifically the New Haven's electric locomotive fleet, while also covering the very iconic EP5, one of my personal favorites. So don't forget to subscribe if you are interested in videos like this. To first explain the BR52, we must go back to its predecessor, the BR50, a 210-2 design, as the older pre-grouping era of locomotives was starting to get old, as many of these had been designs that date back to the very First World War. The first of these new standard freight locomotives would be delivered by Henschel and Son between April and July 1939. The first batch would number 12. However, with the war, more locomotives would be needed to help move armies and goods across Europe. In 1939, 228 BR50s would be produced alone. However, with the toll of the war, Germany needed cheaper locomotives and they needed much more. This would directly lead us to the BR52. The BR52 would be simpler, cheaper, but it would also be somewhat of a new design. The requirements for the BR52 would be an axle load of 15 tons, that it could haul a 1200 ton train at 65 km per hour on flat ground. It would also have to be cheaper, simpler, and must not use critical materials in its production. What do I mean by this? So things that could be substituted with steel would be substituted with steel. For example, things like copper, platinum, anything that would be rarer and harder to come by during a war. The BR52 would be designed by Richard Wagner, Chief Engineer of the Central Design Office. Borsig would complete the first ever locomotive of the BR52 fleet, and the results were interesting to say at least. It would somehow be 3 tons lighter and would manage to replace all copper components with steel. Traditionally, boiler tubes, which are normally made from copper, were made with steel in the BR52. Another interesting part to consider is that the BR52 has a welded frame. Traditionally, steam locomotives are made with a bar frame. However, the BR52 would be the first ever locomotive built with a welded frame from my knowledge. However, there are exceptions to this. To speed up construction, spare bar frames from the BR50 UK series would be used. However, unlike the British war locomotives at the time, such as the WD locomotives or the Q1 designed by Oliver Bulleid, it was not intended to have a high power to weight ratio. Another interesting part would be a welded frame instead of the traditional bar frame. From my knowledge, the BR52 would be the first ever locomotive built with a welded frame. However, to speed up construction, spare bar frames from the BR50 would also be used. Another importance was a long-lasting and easy to maintain engine. Unlike the British War Department locomotives or the Q1 designed by Oliver Bulleid, it was not intended to have a high power to weight ratio. The BR52 would also feature enclosed cabs due to the expectation that these engines would also be heavily used during winter times. These cabs would be nicknamed Norwegians. The driver's cabs would have a small gangway to allow for firemen to access a coal tender. However, due to this, other tenders of the German standard locomotive line, the BR52 tenders are unique to the BR52 itself. One glaring issue that the locomotive had was very poor idling characteristics. This is due to the simplification and omission of certain parts. One important part that lacked was a feed water heater. As the name implies, it would heat the water up before entering the boiler, and a steam jet pump would replace the piston feed pump. Despite these downsides, it was more powerful than the older Prussian locomotives that they replaced. These could haul 40% more freight on the same lines. As the war with the Soviet Union would start taking a massive toll on German logistics, a solution was to group the locomotive manufacturers to maximize efficiency. This was named the Gemeinschaft Große Deutsche Lokomotivhersteller. This group would comprise of Lofag Vienna, Henschel Flugzeug AG, Schwarzkopf, Krauss-Maffei, Borsig, and various others. Many of these locomotives, especially towards the end of the war, were built by forced labourers, and due to this, many locomotives had to be fixed later on at depots due to things such as inhuman conditions or sabotage. In total, the BR52 fleet would number 7,794. Some of these BR52s would be built with condensing tenders as well. And to showcase some propaganda and a showcase of efficiency, the German war machine would have a parade of war locomotives that would be showcased on July 7, 1943, as they would achieve 51 locomotives built on a single day. This is where the BR52 would play a massive part. It would play a massive part in rebuilding war-torn Europe. The Deutsche Bundesbahn of West Germany would take over 820 to 921 locomotives and 88 locomotives that would also be built after the war with spare parts. The 52 wouldn't last incredibly long in Deutsche Bahn service due to newer locomotives being built and developed taking its role. The last BR52 would survive till 1962, however, only 254 would still be in service by 1954, and over time they would be phased out. However, the 52 was used as a way to elongate the life of other locomotives. For example, the BR50 would start to have boilers that were aging, and to solve this, BR52 boilers would be reused to save money and construction costs. The BR52 would earn its keep, mainly in the Eastern Bloc, however. The East German Railway Company, Deutsche Reichsbahn, or DR for short, would use these machines far into the 90s. 3 variations would be used: the original locomotives built by the Deutsche Reichsbahn Gesellschaft, the 52.8, which are BR52s that are rebuilt from the ground up, and the 52.9, which are rebuilt and fitted to use coal dust. On December 31st, 1946, the Deutsche Reichsbahn would have 1,500 locomotives, with 1,245 operational. However, as part of reparations for the war, the Soviet Union would request 613 that would be sent back. The rest would stay in East Germany to help rebuild, and the important thing to note, at this time, a vast majority of the operational fleet were war locomotives, whereas West Germany would have access to pre-war locomotives, which in many ways were better overall in terms of quality and features. This creates an issue, as in 1954, with the Deutsche Reichsbahn, it would only have 324 BR52 operational, with the rest of the operational fleet being loaned out to Eastern Bloc countries, with the majority sent to Poland and Czechoslovakia. By the 1960s, East Germany would repurchase back some of the BR52s that were repatriated to the Soviet Union, and in total, it would have 862 locomotives. In terms of rebuilds and repairs, while the whole fleet of BR52s would see minor services and repairs, and this would mean replacing and upgrading parts that were either designed poorly or undersized for longevity. One massive improvement to help the idling situation would be the installation of new mixing preheaters, and these were installed into all BR52s. 200 of the BR52s would be selected for the Warlocomotive scheme, a scheme that was planned to rebuild older locomotives to hopefully extract as much power as possible. This would be named the BR52.80. These would feature the new Type 50E boiler that was originally meant for the BR50-35. One interesting thing to consider is that all rebuilds of the BR52 were of the welded frame construction, and in total the rebuilds would feature things such as new welded cylinders, mixed preheater system, and a style of cab wall with oval windows. Older tenders were rebuilt with new tubs, and the performance of the 52.80s would be faster and more powerful. A rebuilt was able to haul 1400 tons at 70 kilometers, an improvement from 1200 at 65 from the original series, and the maximum tonnage of this new Rika locomotive scheme would be 2600 tons. The 52.8 would survive well past the expiration era for steam locomotives. While the end of steam was planned for 1988 in East Germany, the BR52.8 would be still in use until the reunification in 1994. And in 1991, 113 rebuilds would still be in service. The 52.90s were another variation of the BR52s. These locomotives would use pulverized coal, as hard coal was in short supply after the war. These coals would use a pulverized lignite firing system, and it would use compressed air in the tender, and it would be sucked into the hermetically sealed firebox. However, only 25 of these were ever built, and one easy tell of this class is the open driving cab. The last of the coal dust locomotives were retired in 1978, numbered 529900. One still survives in this variation at the DB Museum in Halle as a loan from the Dresden Transport Museum. The USSR and Eastern Bloc countries would make use of these war locomotives especially. One issue that was faced would be that the USSR would have a different gauge. The USSR uses the Russian broad gauge, which is 85mm wider than the standard gauge. The USSR would end up with 2,000 of these BR52s, and to use them on broad gauge, many were converted by simple means, either collars on their existing axles, or by longest axle shafts were used instead, depending on the situation regarding the axle shafts. One different and difficult conversion to make, especially on the new Soviet BR52s, were the semi-automatic SA3 couplers. These were very similar to the AAR knuckle couplers fitted on American locomotives. However, by the 1960s, many of these BR52s would be replaced with more diesel traction or electrics in the Soviet Union and would be sold off to other Eastern Bloc countries such as Poland. Poland would name their BR52s the TY2 and TY42. The difference was very simple. The BR52s that were built after the war from existing parts or completed would be designated the TY42, while purchased or originally built BR52s would be named TY2 by the PKP, the Polish Railway. Currently, two serve in operating condition as heritage trains, run by the Museum of Transport and Railway Technology. While many other countries do have used or do use the BR52, such as France, Bulgaria, and many other European countries, that is all the time we have for today. However, what exists of the BR52 today? Well, not surprisingly, many other locomotives covered on this channel have either been scrapped or been ignored. However, 5 of these BR52s still run in commercial services, incredibly enough, and these serve a mining operation and a connecting line in the Tula power plant in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as a diesel fuel is still somewhat scarce in the country due to a civil war. However, with the situation pleasantly getting better, they will be replaced soon. A privilege of this large production run and service long after the war, many original BR52s still exist in running condition, and even more impressively, many survive as operational locomotives. In Germany itself, a majority of the surviving BR52s are the later 52.8, the ones that were used by the Deutsche Reichsbahn. Today, that is all we will cover. Next episode, we'll be exploring the iconic 20th Century Limited, going through the motive power, but also the history and the development of the garages themselves. The fortnight after, we'll be going through the incredible but ignored history of the New Haven Railroad, discussing things such as the wonderful EP5 and purchase ELCs. Thank you for watching this episode from Pan Up, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as it does help me in getting these videos out to more people. I just want to say thank you to my viewers and to my partner for supporting me. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is the last video before Christmas, so I just want to wish you a very Merry Christmas wherever you are in the world, and hope you get a new locomotive for Christmas or a new carriage. Recently I bought myself a new treat for myself, and it's a beautiful DB BR01 by famously known as Precision Craft Models, or Broadway Limited if you live in America. It's genuinely very, very cool. I'll probably post it up on the community page, but yeah, just want to say thank you. Have a Merry Christmas.